The massive doors of Galactic Trade Station Nexus 7 opened with a soft hiss, revealing a sight that made Tejo pause in wonder. The station stretched out before him like a small city floating in space. The ceiling arched high above, painted to look like a sky with moving clouds. Alien beings of every shape and size walked through the wide corridors, their voices creating a constant buzz of conversation in dozens of languages. Tejo adjusted his Earth Federation uniform and stepped forward. His heart beat faster as he realized this was really happening. He was the first human to set foot on this station. Everything he did here would be remembered in history books. The Korean engineer had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. He had learned 17 alien languages, studied galactic politics, and trained in diplomatic protocols. Conid to, Cineron, Conid so, Miltos, Conid . And we're at. Could have prepared him for the reality of being surrounded by creatures that looked like they came from nightmares or dreams, eh? Group of tall reptilian beings walked past him. Their scales glittered like emeralds in the artificial light. These were the Variks, one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. Behind them floated creatures that looked like living smoke, their forms shifting and changing as they moved. Nebulans, he remembered from his studies, as Tejo made his way toward the registration desk. He noticed how other beings looked at him. Some stared with curiosity, tilting their heads as they tried to figure out what species he belonged to. Others barely glanced in his direction, as if he was not worth their attention. The registration clerk was a being with 4 arms and skin that looked like tree bark. It looked up at Tejo with eyes that had no whites, just solid black orbs. Species. Identification, the clerk said in a voice that sounded like rustling leaves. Human. From Earth. I am here for the diplomatic gathering, Tejo replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The clerk's 4 hands moved across different keyboards at once. After a moment, it looked back at Tejo with what might have been surprise. Human. Yes, the new species. It's the ones who just learned to travel between stars last cycle. The clerk's voice carried a tone that Tejo did not like. It sounded almost amused. We're assigned to quarters, Section K7, Level 12. Tejo took the room key card, a small crystal that glowed blue when he touched it. Thank you. Good. You tell me where the diplomatic quarters are located? Those are in Section A through D levels 1 through 5. The clerk went back to its work, clearly done with the conversation. As Tejo walked away, he felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. If the diplomatic quarters were in the first 5 levels, why was he assigned to level 12? And what was Section K? The answer came when he found his room an hour later. Section K was clearly the service area of the station. The corridors were narrower, the lighting dimmer, and the air recycling system made odd noises. His room was barely large enough for a bed and a small desk. The walls were made of some kind of metal that had seen better days. But what caught his attention were the scratch marks on the walls. Deep gouges ran from floor to ceiling in several places. Whatever had made these marks had claws and serious strength. Tejo ran his fingers along one of the scratches. It was too deep to be accidental, eh? Chime from his communication device interrupted his thoughts. The message was from the station administrator, welcoming him to the gathering and informing him that the opening ceremony would begin in 2 hours. Tejo unpacked his few belongings and changed into his formal diplomatic uniform. The blue and white colors of the Earth Federation looked bright against the dull metal walls of his room. He checked his appearance in the small mirror and took a deep breath. The central assembly hall was enormous. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species filled the space, their conversations creating a noise like a waterfall. Tejo found his assigned seat and realized immediately that he had been placed in the back section far from the main speaking platform. The ceremony began with introductions of each species' representatives, and they called the Varix delegation. A massive reptilian being stood up. He was at least 8 feet tall, with scales that reflected light like mirrors. The crowd murmured with respect as he spoke about his species-long history in the galaxy. "I am Sectar of the Varix Empire," the being announced in a voice that rumbled like thunder. "My people have traveled the stars for 50,000 of your years. We have built cities on 1,000 worlds and brought order to countless systems." Crowd applauded. Other species followed, each representative speaking about their civilization's achievements. The Chithri Queen, a being that looked like a giant insect with jeweled wings, spoke about her people's mastery of biotechnology. The Nebulan Ambassador, barely visible as a cloud of shimmering gas, talked about their exploration of dimensions beyond normal space. Finally, they called for the human representative. Teho stood up, suddenly aware that every eye in the hall was on him. He walked to the speaking platform, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "I am Teho Kim of Earth," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's sound system. "My species has just learned to travel between stars. We have built cities on only one world, our home. We have no great empires or ancient wisdom to share." Some beings in the audience made sounds that might have been laughter. Sectar leaned back in his seat with what looked like amusement. "But we have something else," Teho continued. "We have curiosity. We have the desire to learn. And we have the determination to find our place among the stars, no matter how long it takes." The silence that followed felt heavy. Then, slowly, some beings began to clap. It was polite applause, nothing more. As Teho returned to his seat, he heard whispered conversations starting around the hall. "So young," one voice said. "It's barely evolved," said another. "They look so fragile," came a third comment. During the reception that followed, Teho tried to engage with other diplomats. Most were polite but distant. The Varix representatives barely acknowledged his presence. When he approached Sectar to introduce himself properly, the tall reptilian looked down at him with obvious disdain. "Ah, the human," Sectar said, his voice carrying across the nearby area. "Tell me, little mammal, how does your species plan to contribute to galactic civilization? What can you offer that we cannot do better ourselves?" The conversation around them stopped. Teho felt dozens of eyes watching him, waiting to see how he would respond to the challenge. "We offer ourselves," Teho said simply. "Our perspective, our determination. Sometimes the youngest voice in the room has something worth hearing." Sectar made a sound that was definitely laughter. "Determination. How quaint. I suppose when you are as weak as your species appears to be, determination is all you have left." Other beings nearby joined in the laughter. Teho felt his face grow warm, but he kept his expression calm. This was exactly what he had been trained for. Not everyone would welcome humanity with open arms. As the evening continued, Teho found himself increasingly isolated. Conversations would stop when he approached. Beings would make excuses to move away when he tried to join discussions. At the end of the reception, he was standing alone near the refreshment table. Watching the other diplomats form their own groups and alliances, the final insult came when he tried to leave. A group of young Varix blocked his path, their scales shifting to darker colors that Teho recognized as a sign of aggression. "Leaving so soon, mammal?" one of them asked. "The night is still young. Perhaps you need to get back to your tree." "Maybe he needs his mother to tuck him in," another added, causing the group to hiss with laughter. Teho looked at each of them in turn, memorizing their faces. "Excuse me," he said politely, and walked around them as he made his way back to his small room in Section K. Teho reflected on the day. It had gone exactly as badly as he had feared it might, but it had also gone exactly as he had expected. Change never came easily, especially not in a galaxy where some species had been the rulers for thousands of years. Back in his room, Teho sat at his small desk and began writing his first report to Earth. As he wrote, his eyes kept drifting to the scratch marks on the walls. Whatever had made those marks was gone now, but the evidence of its presence remained. He had a feeling that his own presence on this station would leave marks as well. The question was what kind they would be. 3 days had passed since the opening ceremony, and Teho was beginning to understand the social structure of the station. The powerful species stayed in the upper levels, making deals and forming alliances. The newer or weaker species were pushed to the middle levels, grateful for any scraps of attention they received. And then there was Teho, alone in Section K, visiting the main areas only when required for official meetings. He was studying trade reports in the station library when the first alarm sounded. It was not the sharp warning of danger, but a deep, rolling tone that seemed to vibrate through the station's metal structure. Around him, beings of every species stopped what they were doing and looked up with expressions of surprise and concern. The library fell completely silent. Even the usual hum of conversation from the corridors outside had stopped. Teho closed his datapad and looked around, trying to understand what was happening. A nebulon floating nearby began to shimmer more rapidly, which Teho had learned was a sign of nervousness. "They come," the gaseous being whispered, its voice like wind through leaves. "Who comes?" Teho asked. But the nebulon had already drifted away without answering. More alarms joined the first, creating a symphony of deep tones that made Teho's chest feel tight. Through the library's large windows, he could see beings in the corridors moving with purpose. But they were not running toward something. They were moving away from the docking bays. Teho made his way to the nearest information screen. The display showed a simple message in 12 languages. Corven Dominion vessel requesting dock clearance. All non-essential personnel report to quarters. Security level elevated to code orange. Corven Dominion. The name meant something important, but Teho could not remember what. He had studied so many species and civilizations that some details had become blurred. But the reaction of everyone around him suggested this was not a routine diplomatic visit. He found his answer when he reached the central plaza. Hundreds of beings had gathered there, but they were not celebrating or socializing, as they usually did. They stood in small groups, speaking in hushed voices and glancing nervously at the large viewing screens that showed the space around the station. On the screen, Teho could see a ship approaching. It was unlike any vessel he had seen before. Where most ships were smooth and curved, this one was angular and aggressive. Its hull was dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon ports were clearly visible along its sides, and the entire design suggested something built for war rather than trade. "Beautiful, is it not?" a voice said behind him. Te-Ho turned to see Sektar, the Varric's ambassador who had mocked him at the opening ceremony, but the reptilian's usual arrogant demeanor was gone. Instead, he looked at the approaching ship with something that might have been reverence. "You know this ship?" Teho asked. "I know what it represents," Sektar replied, his scales shifting to a darker shade. "The Corven Dominion. The apex predators of the galaxy. When they arrive somewhere, everything else becomes prey. Are they here for the trade negotiations?" Sektar made the hissing sound that passed for Varric's laughter, but there was no humor in it. "The Corvani do not negotiate trade deals. Human. They are beyond such concerns. When they appear, it is because something has caught their interest, something they consider worthy of their attention." The reptilian paused, studying Teho with those cold, intelligent eyes. "The question is, what could have drawn them here? This gathering is routine. It's nothing that should interest the galaxy's most dangerous species." As if summoned by their conversation, the ship docked with a sound that resonated through the station's structure. The viewing screen switched to show the docking bay, where station security forces had formed a ceremonial guard. But Teho noticed that even the security officers looked nervous. The ship's airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure stepped into view that made several beings in the plaza gasp audibly. The Corven was enormous. Standing at least 7 feet tall, his body was humanoid but built like a predator with muscles that moved like steel cables under skin that looked tough as armor. His face was angular and sharp, with eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Most striking were his hands, which ended in claws that looked like they could tear through metal, but it was not his size or his weapons that made the watching crowd so nervous. It was the way he moved. Every step was controlled and purposeful. His head turned slowly as he surveyed the docking bay, and Taeho could see beings flinch when that gaze passed over them, even through the screen. "Daesung," Sektar whispered, and his scales turned almost black. "They sent Daesung. You know him? Every species in the galaxy knows of him. He is their greatest warrior diplomat. Some say he has never lost a battle. Others say he has never needed to fight one because his enemies surrender when they see him coming." Taeho watched as Daesung walked through the docking bay, the station. Security officers bowed deeply as he passed, but he paid them no attention. His focus seemed to be on something else, something beyond the immediate area. "What does he want here?" Taeho asked. Before Sektar could answer, the crowd in the plaza began to move. Beings were backing away from the main corridor that led from the docking bays. Word was spreading that the Corven was coming this way. "You will want to meet with the senior diplomats," Sektar said, but his voice carried uncertainty. "That is the protocol. You'll assess the gathering and decide if anything. Here interests the Dominion." The crowd continued to part as footsteps echoed from the corridor. They were heavy, measured steps that seemed to count out time like a war drum. Taeho found himself holding his breath as the sound grew closer. Then Daesung entered the plaza, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was even more imposing in person than on the screens. His presence filled the space in a way that had nothing to do with his physical size. It was the presence of something that had never known fear, never known defeat, never known doubt. When he looked at the assembled beings, Taeho could see why entire species bowed to the Corven Dominion. The plaza fell silent, except for the sound of nervous breathing. Daesung stood in the center of the space and slowly turned his head, examining each group of beings in turn. His gaze passed over the Varix delegation, the Chithri representatives, the Nebulan ambassadors. Each time his eyes moved to a new group, those beings seemed to shrink back slightly. Then his gaze found Taeho. The human felt the weight of that stare like a physical force. Those glowing eyes locked onto his and held. Seconds passed, then more seconds. The rest of the plaza seemed to fade away until there was only Taeho and the predator studying him. Taeho forced himself to stand straight and meet that gaze directly. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to look away, to run, to find somewhere to hide. But he had learned long ago that running from a problem only made it worse. If this creature wanted to stare at him, then he would stare back. Something changed in Daesung's expression. Intensity remained, but there was a new quality to it. Interest, perhaps, or curiosity. The Corven tilted his head slightly, like a predator examining something unexpected. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, Daesung began walking toward Taeho. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship. Things pressed themselves against walls and pillars to get out of his path. Some of the smaller species actually fled the plaza entirely. But Taeho stood his ground, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. Daesung stopped 3 feet away from him. Up close, the Corven was even more intimidating. Claws were longer than Taeho's fingers, and the human could see old scars crisscrossing the alien's arms and chest. Battle scars earned in conflicts that Taeho could not imagine. "You do not flee," Daesung said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel sliding over stone. "No," Taeho replied, surprised that his voice came out steady. "You do not lower your eyes. No." Daesung began to circle him slowly, like a hunter examining prey. Taeho forced himself to remain still, even as every nerve in his body screamed warnings. The Corven was close enough that Taeho could smell him, a scent like heated metal and ozone. "Interesting," Daesung said as he completed his circle and faced Taeho again. "You are the human." It was not a question, but Taeho nodded anyway. "I am Taeho Kim of Earth." Earth. Daesung spoke the word like he was tasting it. The new species. The ones who think they can join the galactic community. Around them, the plaza remained silent. Every being present was watching this encounter with fascination and fear. Some were probably already composing messages to send to their homeworlds about what they were witnessing. "We hope to earn our place," Taeho said carefully. Hope Daesung's expression might have been amusement, though it was hard to tell on his alien features. A dangerous emotion, human. Hope can make one brave, can also make one foolish. Sometimes they are the same thing. Now Daesung definitely looked amused. He leaned forward slightly, bringing his face closer to Taeho's. Yes, sometimes they are. The Corven straightened and took a step back. For a moment, Taeho thought the encounter was over. Then Daesung spoke again, his voice carrying clearly across the silent plaza. I will be watching you, Taeho Kim of Earth. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a plaza full of shocked beings and one human who was trying very hard not to shake. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, Sektar approached Taeho. With an expression of disbelief, "Do you understand what just happened?" the Varix asked. Taeho shook his head. Not really. A Corven warrior just spoke to you as an equal? That does not happen, ever. Sektar's scales were still dark with nervousness. In all my years of diplomacy, I have never seen a Corven show interest in a species they considered beneath them. Maybe. He was just curious about humans. No. Sektar's voice was firm. Curiosity would have been different. This was evaluation. He was deciding if you were worth his time. The reptilian paused, studying Taeho with new eyes. The question is, what conclusion did he reach? The next 2 days on the station felt different for Taeho. Everywhere he went, beings stared at him with new expressions. Some looked curious, others seemed nervous, and a few appeared openly hostile. Word had spread quickly about his encounter with Daesung, and nobody was quite sure what to make of it. Taeho tried to continue his diplomatic work as if nothing had changed. He attended meetings, reviewed trade agreements, and attempted to build relationships with other species. He could feel eyes following him wherever he went, and more than once, he caught glimpses of a tall, dark figure watching him from across crowded rooms. Daesung was observing him. The Corven warrior made no attempt to hide his interest. He would appear in the background during Taeho's meetings, standing silently in doorways or sitting alone at distant tables in the dining areas. He never approached again, never spoke, but his presence was always felt. The other diplomats found this development deeply unsettling. During a break between sessions, the Nebulan ambassador drifted over to Taeho with obvious concern. "The Predator watches you constantly," the gaseous being whispered. "This is not normal behavior for his kind." "What did you do to attract such attention?" "I honestly do not know," Taeho replied. "I only spoke to him for a few minutes." "That was enough," the Nebulan said nervously, before floating away. But if some species were worried about Daesung's interest in Taeho, others saw it as an opportunity to prove their own superiority. The Chithri seemed particularly eager to demonstrate that humans were not worthy of Corvan attention. The incident happened during the formal dinner on the 4th day. The great dining hall had been decorated with floating lights and exotic plants. From a dozen worlds, representatives from every species sat at long tables, sharing food and conversation. It was supposed to be a celebration of galactic unity and cooperation. Taeho had been assigned a seat at one of the middle tables, far from the places of honor but not quite in the back. The Chithri delegation sat directly across from him there, insect-like forms glittering under the lights. Queen Veek, their leader, had been watching him throughout the meal with compound eyes that reflected the light like jewels. "Tell us, human," Queen Veek said suddenly, her voice carrying the clicking undertones of her species. "What do you think of our station's hospitality?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Taeho had learned to be careful around the Chithri. Queen. She had a reputation for verbal traps and social games. "It has been educational," he replied carefully. "I am learning much about galactic culture." "Educational? How diplomatic." The Queen's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Perhaps you would like to learn about Chithri customs as well." Before Taeho could respond, Queen Vicdache reached for a crystal decanter filled with clear liquid. As she lifted it, her movements suddenly became clumsy. The decanter tilted too far, spilling its contents directly onto Taeho's plate and uniform. The liquid hissed as it hit his clothing. Taeho felt immediate burning pain where the substance touched his skin through the fabric. The smell of dissolving material filled the air as his uniform began to disintegrate where the liquid had splashed. "Oh my," Queen Vict H said, her voice carrying false concern. "How terribly clumsy of me. I do hope that was not too uncomfortable." Around the table, other beings watched with interest. Some looked shocked, others seemed amused. The liquid continued to eat through Taeho's uniform, and he could feel it burning his arm beneath the dissolving sleeve. Taeho looked down at the damage, then back at Queen Vict H. Her compound eyes glittered with satisfaction. This had been deliberate, he realized. A test to see how he would react to injury and humiliation. Every instinct told him to flee. The pain in his arm was getting worse, and he needed medical attention. The rational response would be to excuse himself, seek treatment, and avoid further confrontation. That was what the Queen expected. That was what would prove humans were weak. Instead, Taeho reached into his diplomatic pouch and pulled out a small emergency medical kit. While the entire table watched, he calmly cut away the dissolving sleeve of his uniform, exposing the chemical burn on his arm. The skin was red and blistered where the acid had touched it. He applied neutralizing gel to the wound. His hands steadied despite the pain. Then he wrapped the burn with medical tape, all without making a sound of discomfort. When he was finished, he looked back at Queen Vic. "Chithri acid," he said conversationally. "I read about it in my cultural briefings. It's very effective for breaking down organic matter. Thank you for the demonstration." He picked up his eating utensil and continued with his meal as if nothing had happened. The silence at the table stretched on for long seconds. Queen Vic stared at him with what might have been surprise. Their beings looked between them, uncertain how to react. "You are not leaving?" the Queen asked finally. "Why would I leave?" Taeho replied, taking another bite of his food. "The dinner is not finished, and I am still hungry." A low rumble of conversation began around the hall as word of the incident spread. Taeho ignored the stares and whispers, focusing on his meal. The food tasted like ash in his mouth, and his arm throbbed with pain, but he gave no sign of discomfort. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a familiar figure standing in the doorway of the dining hall. Daesung watched the scene with intense interest. His glowing eyes fixed on Taeho's calm response to the attack. The rest of the dinner passed without incident, though Taeho noticed that several species representatives seemed to be looking at him with new expressions. When the formal part of the evening ended, most beings moved to the reception area for continued socializing. Taeho was about to return to his quarters when a shadow fell across his path. He looked up to find Daesung standing before him, blocking his way to the exit. "That was well done," the Corven said in his gravelly voice. You know what? Daesung gestured toward the dining hall. "Lesser beings would have fled in pain and shame. You finished your meal." Taeho shrugged, trying to ignore the throbbing in his bandaged arm. Running away would not have solved anything, would only have encouraged more of the same behavior. Die. What if the acid had been stronger? What if it had been designed to kill rather than merely injure? The question caught Taeho off guard. He thought about it for a moment before answering. "Then I suppose I would have died eating dinner. There are worse ways to go." Daesung made a sound that might have been laughter. "You do not fear death." "I fear many things," Taeho said honestly. "But I fear failing my people more than dying. If I run from every challenge, how can I expect other species to respect humanity? And what if respect never comes? What if your courage changes nothing?" Taeho met the Corven's glowing gaze. "Then at least I will know I tried. My ancestors did not survive by giving up when things became difficult. Neither will I." Daesung studied him for a long moment. Around them, the sounds of the reception continued, but this corner of the corridor felt isolated from the rest of the station. "Your species is young," the Corven said finally. "You have no great achievements, no ancient wisdom, no powerful weapons. Most beings see this as weakness. Most beings may be right, perhaps, but weakness and inexperience are not the same thing." Daesung paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Tell me, human, what do you know of the hunt?" The questions seemed to come from nowhere. I know that predators hunt prey, the strong consume the weak. That is what children believe. The truth is more complex. Daesong began walking slowly down the corridor, and Taeho fell into step beside him. The greatest hunts are not about strength against weakness. They are about patience against haste, cunning against force, determination against despair. They walked in silence for a few moments. Taeho wondered where this conversation was leading. In the ancient stories of my people, Daesung continued, the greatest hunters were not always the largest or the strongest. They were the ones who never gave up, who would track their prey across continents and through seasons, who would endure pain and hardship without complaint, who understood that the hunt is not always about the kill. What is it about then? Daesung stopped walking and turned to face him. It is about proving that you have the right to exist, that you deserve your place in the world, that when death comes for you, it will have to work for its prize. The words hung in the air between them. Taeho felt as if the Corven was trying to tell him something important, but he was not sure he understood the full meaning. You faced acid tonight, Daesung said. You did not flee. You did not cry out. You finished what you had started. This tells me something about your species. What does it tell you? That perhaps the other beings on this station are underestimating you? That perhaps strength comes in forms they do not recognize? The Corven's expression was unreadable. That perhaps humans understand something about the hunt that older species have forgotten. Before Taeho could respond, Daesung turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Taeho watched him go, more confused than ever, but somehow feeling that something important had just happened, as he made his way back to his quarters in Section K. Taeho thought about the evenings. Events. The burn on his arm still hurt, and his uniform was ruined, but he felt oddly satisfied. He had been tested, and the conversations started small, a brief exchange in the corridor, a shared table in the quiet section of the library. Taeho was not sure when Daesong had stopped watching him from a distance and started actually talking to him, but it had happened gradually over the past 3 days. At first, their discussions focused on simple topics: the station's layout, different species and their customs, the challenges of diplomacy between beings who had evolved on different worlds. But as the days passed, their conversations grew deeper. Taeho found himself looking forward to these meetings. Daesung was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. The Corven warrior possessed a sharp intelligence that cut through diplomatic nonsense like a blade through silk. He asked questions that made Taeho think about things he had never considered before. Your species evolved on a single world, Daesong said during one of their talks. They were sitting in an observation lounge, watching ships arrive and depart through the large viewing windows. Yet you chose to leave it and seek out other worlds. Why? Taeho considered the question. Because we are curious. Because we want to learn and grow. Because staying in one place forever felt like a kind of death. Death. An interesting way to describe stagnation. Daesong turned his glowing eyes toward Taeho. My people have a saying. A hunter who stops hunting becomes prey. Is that what happened to some of the older species here? They stopped hunting? Perhaps. They became comfortable with their power. They forgot that strength must be earned again each day. The Corven was quiet for a moment. Tell me about your world, about how your species became what it is. Taeho thought about Earth, about the long history of human struggle and survival. We were not the strongest creatures on our planet, not the fastest or the largest. But we learned to work together. We learned to persist when others would give up. We learned to adapt to any environment. Persistence. Adaptation. Cooperation. Daesong repeated the words slowly. These are traits my people value highly. Really? I thought Corvani were solitary hunters? Another misconception spread by species who fear us. Daesung's expression might have been amusement. We hunt alone when necessary, but we are strongest. When we hunt as a pack, the greatest achievements of the Dominion came when warriors worked together toward a common goal. This surprised Taeho. Most of what he had read about Corvani culture emphasized individual strength and competition. I did not know that. Few species bother to learn the truth about us. They prefer to believe we are mindless monsters who solve every problem with violence. Desung stood up and moved to the window, watching a Varrick's cargo ship maneuver toward a docking port. It is easier to fear something you do not understand. Is that why you came here? To be better understood? I came here because something caught my attention. Desung looked back at Taeho, new species that refused to submit. When faced with superior force, that showed courage instead of cunning, determination instead of fear. The meaning behind his words was becoming clearer. You have been evaluating humanity. I have been evaluating you. One individual can teach much about their entire species if you know how to look. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several young Varricks. Taeho recognized them as the same group that had mocked him on his first night. They entered the lounge laughing loudly about something, their scales bright with excitement and alcohol. The leader of the group, A. Varricks, named Tekmor, noticed Taeho and Desung sitting together. His laughter stopped, and his scales shifted to darker colors. Well, Tekmor said, his voice slurred from drinking. Look what we have here. The little mammal thinks he can sit with the apex predator. His companions joined in with hissing laughter. They began moving closer to where Taeho and Desung sat, their movements unsteady but clearly aggressive. Desung remained perfectly still, but Taeho noticed that the Corven's eyes had begun to glow brighter. It was not a good sign. Perhaps the human needs to be reminded of his place, Tekmor continued, emboldened by his friend's encouragement. Perhaps he needs to understand that some conversations are not for creatures like him. I suggest you leave, Taeho said quietly, standing up to face them. You suggest? Tekmar's scales turned almost black with rage. You suggest to us? You're Varricks. We ruled star systems when your species was crawling in mud. Yet here you are, drunk, and picking fights with someone half your size. Taeho replied, how far your species has fallen. The insult hit its mark. Tekmar's companions stopped laughing and moved into a fighting formation. They were much larger than Taeho, with natural armor and claws that could tear through metal. In a fair fight, he would have no chance, but Desung was no longer sitting. The Corven had risen to his feet with fluid grace, and suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to drop. His presence filled the space like a gathering storm. Is there a problem here? Desung asked, his voice carrying undertones that made Taeho's skin crawl. The young Varricks froze. Whatever alcohol-fueled courage had driven them this far evaporated when faced with the galaxy's most dangerous predator. Tekmar's scales went. Completely pale? No, honored one, Tekmor stammered. No problem at all. Good. Desung took a step forward, and the Varricks instinctively backed away. 'Cause if there were a problem, I would need to solve it. And my solutions tend to be permanent. The threat was delivered in a conversational tone, but its meaning was crystal clear. The young Varricks looked between Desung and Taeho with expressions of growing confusion and fear. We were just leaving, one of Tekmar's companions said quickly. Excellent decision, Desung replied. I suggest you leave quickly, before I change my mind about whether there's a problem. The Varricks fled from the lounge as if chased by demons. Their departure left Taeho and Desung alone again, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the station's systems. You did not need to do that, Taeho said finally. Did I not? Desung turned to face him. You were outnumbered 3-1 by opponents twice your size. The outcome would have been predictable, maybe, but I would have faced them anyway. That is exactly my point. Corven moved closer, studying Taeho with those intense eyes. You would have fought a battle you could not win, against enemies you could not defeat, for a principle you would not abandon. Is that stupidity or courage? With your species, I am beginning to think they are the same thing. Desung's expression was thoughtful. Tell me, human, what do you know of pack bonds? It's a change of subject, surprised Taeho. I know that some species form strong social connections. Groups that hunt together, fight together, protect each other, in Corven culture. A pack bond is sacred. It means that an injury to one is an injury to all, that the strength of the group becomes the strength of each individual. Desung paused. It is not given lightly, I can imagine. Can you? A Corven's voice carried a strange intensity. because when I stood up to defend you just now, I was not acting as a neutral observer. I was acting as someone who has begun to see you as part of my pack." The words hit Taeho like a physical blow. He stared at Daesung, trying to process what he had just heard. "I do not understand. Your species and mine evolved differently, on different worlds, under different stars. But we face the same challenges. We value the same qualities. We understand the same truths about survival and strength and the courage to stand when others would fall." Daesung moved to the window and looked out at the stars. "The other species here see differences. They see a weak human and a dangerous Corven. They cannot imagine what we might have in common. And what do we have in common? We are both hunters, not the kind that kills for sport or dominance, but the kind that never gives up, that pursues what matters, regardless of the cost, that understands that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to surrender." Taeho joined him at the window. In the distance, he could see ships from dozens of species moving through space. Each one represented a different evolutionary path, a different answer to the challenges of survival and growth. "My people call humans pack hunters," Taeho said quietly. "We may not be the strongest or fastest, but we do not abandon our own. We do not quit when things become difficult. And my people call ourselves the eternal hunt. We believe that life itself is a hunt, and that the greatest honor is to die pursuing something worthy." Daesung looked at Taeho. "Perhaps our species are not so different after all." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the endless dance of ships and stars. Taeho felt something shifting between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now you continue to be yourself. Continue to show these other species what humanity truly is. Continue to stand when they expect you to fall." Daesung's voice carried a note of anticipation. "And I will continue to watch, continue to learn, continue to decide whether your species is worthy of friendship with the Dominion. Are not worthy? Then you will face the galaxy alone, as you have been doing." The Corven's expression was unreadable. "But I do not think that will be the case." As they prepared to leave the observation lounge, Taeho felt a strange mixture of hope and responsibility. He was no longer just representing humanity in trade negotiations. He was being evaluated as a potential ally by the most powerful species in the galaxy. The weight of that responsibility should have been crushing. Instead, it felt like a challenge he was ready to meet. After all, he thought with a slight smile, his ancestors had faced worse odds and survived. The hunt, as Daesung would say, was just beginning. The news spread through the station like wildfire. Within hours, every being on Nexus 7 knew that something unprecedented was about to happen. The Corven Dominion had requested the use of the station's ceremonial hall. They were planning some kind of formal announcement. Taeho first learned about it when his door chimed early in the morning. He opened it to find a nervous-looking station administrator, a being with tentacles instead of arms and eyes that could look in different directions at once. "Human Taeho," the administrator said, its voice trembling slightly. "You are commanded to appear in the ceremonial hall at midday. Formal dress is required." "Commanded by whom?" "By the Corven representative. He has requested your presence for a ceremony of great importance." The administrator's tentacles writhed with anxiety. "Please, do not be late. The Corvani do not appreciate delays." After the administrator left, Taeho sat on his small bed and tried to understand what was happening. In the week since his first conversation with Daesung, their friendship had grown stronger. They talked daily now, sharing stories about their respective species and discussing philosophy, strategy, and the nature of strength. But a formal ceremony was something entirely different. Ceremonies meant official recognition, public statements, political implications. Whatever Daesung was planning would be witnessed by representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Taeho put on his best diplomatic uniform and made his way to the ceremonial hall. The corridors were unusually crowded as beings from all over the station hurried toward the same destination. He heard fragments of conversation in dozens of languages, most expressing confusion and concern about what the Corvani might announce. The ceremonial hall was the largest space on the station. It's capable of holding thousands of beings. It was normally used for major trade agreements or peace treaties between species. The fact that it had been reserved for a Corven ceremony sent a clear message about the importance of whatever was about to happen. When Tahoe arrived, the hall was already packed. Representatives from every species sat in carefully arranged sections, their conversations creating a buzz of nervous energy. At the front of the hall, a raised platform had been prepared with ceremonial decorations from the Corven Dominion de Te-Ho found himself directed to a seat in the front row, directly facing the platform. Around him sat the most senior diplomats from the major species. Sektar was there, his scales shifting through various shades of nervousness. Queen Veek sat nearby, her compound eyes reflecting the hall's lights as she tried to see everything at once. The hall fell silent when Desung entered. He was not alone. 3 other Corven warriors accompanied him, each carrying ceremonial weapons and wearing armor decorated with the symbols of their rank. Their presence made even the largest beings in the audience seem small and fragile. Desung approached the platform with the fluid grace that marked all his movements. He wore ceremonial robes over his armor, dark fabric that seemed to absorb light. In his hands he carried an object that made several beings in the audience gasp with recognition. It was a battle claw pendant carved from what looked like black crystal. Even from his seat, Tahoe could see intricate designs covering its surface. The pendant caught the light and seemed to glow with its own inner fire. Representatives of the Galactic community, Desung began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. I come before you today to make an announcement that will change the balance of power in this region of space. The silence in the hall became absolute. Tahoe could hear his own heartbeat as he waited for whatever revelation was coming. For countless generations, the Corven Dominion has stood apart from the politics of lesser species. We have watched civilizations rise and fall. We have seen empires built on arrogance crumble into dust. We have observed strength become weakness and courage become cowardice. Desung paused, letting his words sink in. His glowing eyes swept across the assembled representatives, but occasionally, very rarely, we encounter something that deserves our attention. Something that embodies the values we hold sacred. Something that reminds us why we chose to become the guardians of this galaxy. Tahoe felt a growing certainty about where this speech was leading, but he could hardly believe it. Around him, other beings leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word. Today I stand before you to announce that the Corven Dominion recognizes a new ally, a species that has shown courage in the face of overwhelming odds. A people who understand that true strength comes not from size or weapons, but from the refusal to surrender one's principles. Desung lifted the battleclaw pendant so that everyone in the hall could see it. This is a symbol of pack brotherhood. It has been earned by only 7 individuals in the history of our dominion, all of them Corven warriors who proved themselves in battles that will be remembered forever. The hall erupted in whispers and gasps. Even Tahoe felt shock wash over him. A battleclaw pendant was more than an honor. It was adoption into the most exclusive warrior society in the galaxy. Today, for the first time in our history, this symbol will be given to a member of another species. To a being who has shown us that evolution follows many paths, but courage follows only one. Desung stepped down from the platform and walked directly toward Tahoe. The human stood up, his legs suddenly unsteady. Around him, thousands of beings watched in stunned silence. Tahoe Kim of Earth, Desung said, his voice formal but warm. You have shown courage without arrogance.
Oh, determination.
Without cruelty. Strength without brutality. You have faced injury and insult without retreating. You have stood against superior force without yielding. The Corven warrior held out the pendant. The Dominion recognizes you as pack brother. From this moment forward, an attack upon us. Your enemies become our enemies. Your struggles become our struggles. Tahoe reached out with trembling hands to accept the pendant. The crystal was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with energy. As his fingers closed around it, he felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. I am honored, Tahoe, said his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the silent hall. The honor is mutual, Desung replied. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, he added, "Let all beings present understand this. Humanity has been judged worthy by the apex predators of this galaxy. They are no longer newcomers seeking acceptance. They are our allies, and they will be treated with the respect that alliance demands." The ceremony continued with formal declarations and ritual exchanges, but Teho barely heard them. He was focused on the pendant in his hands and the incredible responsibility it represented. He was no longer just a diplomat representing his species. He was the first human ever to be accepted as an equal by the Corven Dominion. When the ceremony finally ended, the hall erupted into chaos. Representatives from dozens of species surged forward, all trying to speak with Teho at once. The attitude that had marked his first days on the station was completely gone. Where once there had been dismissal and mockery, now there was respect tinged with fear. Sektar was among the first to reach him. The Varric's ambassador's scales had turned pale with shock. "This changes everything," Sektar said, his voice filled with disbelief. A Corven alliance with humanity? The political implications are staggering. "What does it mean?" Teho asked, still trying to process what had just happened. "It means your species just became one of the most powerful in the galaxy," Queen Veek said, approaching with obvious caution. "The Corven Dominion has never offered protection to another species, never shared their military might, never opened their home world to outsiders. And now they have done all three for humans," Sektar added. "Every species here will need to reconsider their relationship with Earth. What seemed like weakness last week is now revealed as the strength that impressed the galaxy's apex predators." As the crowd continued to swirl around him, Teho caught sight of Daesun, standing at the edge of the platform. The Corven warrior was watching him with an expression that might have been pride. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and Daesung nodded slightly. The gesture was small, but its meaning was clear. This was just the beginning. The real work of building an alliance between their species lay ahead. But for now, Teho allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had come to this station as a representative of a species that no one respected. He was leaving as the brother of the most feared warriors in the galaxy. The pendant felt warm against his chest as he pinned it to his uniform. Round him, beings who had ignored or insulted him now competed for his attention. The human who had been assigned quarters in the service section was now the most important diplomat on the station, but the greatest satisfaction came from knowing that he had earned this honor, not through tricks or political maneuvering, but simply by being himself, by standing firm when others expected him to fall, by showing courage when others showed only fear. As his ancestors might have said, the hunt was successful. Now it was time to see what prey the next hunt would bring. 2 weeks had passed since the ceremony, and Galactic Trade Station Nexus 7 felt like a completely different place. The changes started immediately after Daesung's announcement, spreading through the station's social structure like ripples through water. Tae-Ho no longer lived in Section K. The station administrator had personally moved him to quarters in Section A, Level 2. His new rooms were spacious and comfortable, with a large window showing the stars beyond. More importantly, they were located in the diplomatic quarter, marking his new status in the galactic community. The trade negotiations had taken on an entirely different character as well. Where once human requests for membership had been treated as a minor formality, they were now the focus of intense attention from every major species. The Galactic Commerce Union was preparing to offer humanity full membership with unprecedented benefits, but the most significant changes were happening beyond the station itself. Reports arrived daily from across the galaxy as news of the Corven alliance spread. Some species expressed concern about this new balance of power. Others rushed to establish better relations with Earth. A few began making quiet inquiries about their own relationships with the Dominion. Taho was reviewing the latest batch of trade proposals when his communication device chimed. The message was marked with the highest priority codes, meaning it came directly from Earth's government. The holographic display activated, showing the familiar face of Admiral Park, head of Earth's diplomatic corps. But the woman beside him was new. She was younger than Teho, with the confident bearing of someone trained for leadership. Her uniform marked her as military, but her insignia were unfamiliar. "Greetings, Ambassador Kim," Admiral Park said formally. "I hope this message finds you well, Ambassador Kim." The title was new, reflecting his changed status since the ceremony. Earth's government had wasted no time in promoting him to match his new importance in galactic politics. "First, let me congratulate you on your remarkable achievement," the Admiral continued. "Your success has exceeded our highest expectations. The alliance with the Corven Dominion opens possibilities we never dared to imagine." The woman beside him stepped forward. "I am Colonel Kim Myung of the Earth Strategic Defense Force," she said. "I will be leading our first delegation to the Corven homeworld next month." Taeho felt a flash of surprise. Kim Myung shared his family name, but that was not uncommon on Earth. What surprised him was her obvious youth and the confidence in her bearing. Leading a diplomatic mission to the Corven homeworld was an enormous responsibility. "Has extended an invitation for cultural and military exchanges," Admiral Park explained. "This represents the first time in recorded history that the Corvani have opened their world to outsiders. Colonel Kim will be establishing protocols for cooperation between our species." The message continued with technical details about the upcoming mission. But Taeho found his attention drawn to Colonel Kim. There was something about her expression that reminded him of his own determination when he had first arrived at the station. "The success of this alliance will depend on continued cooperation between individuals who understand both species," Admiral Park concluded. "We are counting on you to maintain the relationship you have built with the Corven representative." The message ended, leaving Taeho alone with his thoughts. Through his window, he could see Corven ships moving through space alongside vessels from dozens of other species. The sight had become common over the past weeks, as both sides worked to establish formal diplomatic and military protocols. A chime at his door interrupted his reflection. He opened it to find Daesung standing in the corridor, but the Corven was not alone. 3 other members of his species accompanied him, each wearing the distinctive armor of high-ranking warriors. "May we enter?" Daesung asked formally. Of course, the Corvani filed into his quarters with their characteristic fluid grace. Taeho had grown accustomed to Daesung's presence, but having 4 apex predators in his living space made the rooms feel much smaller. "I bring news from the Dominion," Daesung announced. "The High Council has approved formal alliance protocols with humanity, military cooperation, technology sharing, joint exploration missions. Your species will receive benefits that have never been offered to any other civilization." One of the other Corvani, a female warrior with intricate scarring on her arms, stepped forward. "I am War Leader Hyansque. Will be commanding the first joint training exercises between our species." The names caught Taeho's attention. Colonel Kim, this Corvan had chosen to use human naming conventions when introducing herself. It was a small gesture, but it suggested careful preparation for working with humanity. "Your Colonel Kim Myung will arrive at our homeworld in 23 Earth days," War Leader Hyanzuk continued. "She will learn our combat techniques, our strategic thinking, our approach to warfare. In return, she will teach us about human tactical flexibility and persistence." "The early reports suggest your species has much to offer," another Corven added. "Our preliminary studies of human military history show unusual patterns. You win battles, you should lose. You survive situations that should destroy you. You adapt to challenges that would break other species." Daesung moved to the window and looked out at the stars. "The galaxy is about to change, brother. This alliance will shift the balance of power in ways that older species cannot yet imagine." "What kind of changes?" "Consider the current state of galactic politics," Daesung replied. "Most species have grown comfortable with their positions. The strong dominate the weak. The old suppress the new. Progress comes slowly, if at all." He turned back to face Taeho. "But now there is a new variable. A young species with the backing of the galaxy's most powerful military force. A people who do not accept limitations as permanent. A civilization that believes in growth and change rather than stability and tradition." The implications were staggering. For thousands of years, galactic civilization had been relatively stable. Species knew their places in the hierarchy. Trade flowed along established routes. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation or economic pressure rather than warfare. But humanity had never been part of that system. They had no established place to maintain, no traditional enemies to appease, no ancient agreements to honor, and now they had the protection and support of the Corven Dominion. Some species will try to test this alliance, war leader Hyonzuk warned. They will probe for weaknesses, look for ways to divide us. They will attempt to convince either humans or Corvani that the partnership serves only one side. We prevent that? By continuing to be yourself, Desung said simply, by showing the same courage and determination that earned this alliance in the first place, by proving again and again that our species share the same values and the same commitment to growth. A new chime interrupted their conversation. This time, it was the station administrator, looking even more nervous than usual. Honored beings, the administrator said, its tentacles writhing with anxiety. The signing ceremony is prepared. Delegations are waiting in the Great Hall. Teho had almost forgotten about the formal treaty signing. After weeks of negotiations, the documents creating humanity's membership in the Galactic Commerce Union were finally ready. But this would not be the probationary membership originally offered. Thanks to Corven's support, Earth was receiving full status with unprecedented privileges. The Great Hall had been transformed for the occasion. Banners from every member species hung from the ceiling, with the newest addition being Earth's blue and white flag, hanging beside the crimson and black standard of the Corven Dominion as they entered the hall. Teho noticed how the seating arrangements had changed since his first day on the station. Instead of being relegated to the back, the human delegation now sat at the high table alongside the most powerful species. Sektar and the other Varix representatives had been moved to lower status positions. The ceremony itself was elaborate, but efficient. One by one, the senior representatives signed the treaty documents that formally welcomed humanity into galactic civilization. When Teho added his signature to the final page, applause filled the hall. But the real moment of significance came when Daesun approached the signing table. In addition to the human membership documents, there was a separate treaty establishing the military alliance between Earth and the Corven Dominion. This marks the beginning of a new era, Daesung announced as he signed the alliance treaty. An era in which strength and courage are valued over age and tradition. An era in which the willingness to stand against impossible odds is recognized. As the highest virtue, as the ceremony concluded, beings from across the galaxy approached Teho to offer congratulations and request meetings. Species that had ignored humanity weeks ago were now eager to establish diplomatic relations. Trade agreements that had been impossible to negotiate were suddenly being offered with generous terms. The transformation was remarkable. But Teho understood that the real work was just beginning. The alliance was more than documents and ceremonies. It was built through daily cooperation, shared challenges, and mutual respect earned over time. Later that evening, as the celebrations continued in the station's various lounges and restaurants, Teho found himself back in the observation lounge where he and Desung had shared their first real conversation. The Corven warrior was there, standing alone at the large windows and watching the stars. "Any regrets?" Teho asked as he joined him. "About what? About offering alliance to a species you have known for only a few weeks?" Desung was quiet for a long moment. "My people have a saying," he finally replied. "The worth of a hunter is revealed not in the hunt's outcome, but in how they face the moment when the prey turns to fight." He looked at Teho with those glowing eyes.
Ow!
"You turned to fight, brother. When faced with mockery, you stood firm. When injured, you did not retreat. When threatened, you did not yield. Your species has spent weeks proving that courage is not about size or strength. It is about the refusal to surrender what matters most." Through the window, they could see ships from Earth beginning to arrive. The first wave of human diplomats, scientists, and military advisors who would help build this new alliance. Among them was the transport-carrying Colonel Kim Myung, who would soon journey to the Corvan homeworld to begin the most ambitious interspecies cooperation in galactic history. "The galaxy will never be the same," Daesung observed. "Is that good or bad?" It depends on what humanity does with the opportunities ahead. The Corven placed a massive hand on Teho's shoulder. But based on what I have learned about your species, I believe the changes will be remarkable. As they watched the human ships dock with the station, Teho reflected on how far he had come since that first day. When he had been assigned quarters in Section K, he had arrived as the representative of a species that no one respected. Was ending as the architect of the most significant political alliance in centuries. The battle claw pendant rested warm against his chest, a constant reminder of the brotherhood he had earned and the responsibility it carried. Somewhere among the arriving ships was his future, and humanity's future shaped by the courage to stand firm when others expected them to fall. The hunt, as Daesung would say, had been successful beyond anyone's wildest expectations,